Now, with breaking news, an Angolan jet has reportedly made an uncleared landing at Cape Town International Airport. For more details on what happened, we are now joined by aviation expert, Phutego Mojapele. Phutego, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, what we do know is that the aircraft has been detained. Who was on board and why was this landing uncleared, and why did they land in Cape Town?
Good afternoon, and to your viewers. This airplane arrived yesterday in Cape Town coming from Angola. It's an airplane that is owned by an Angolan company which got to South Africa without a permit. Now, the foreign airlines or companies or aircrafts, when they come to South Africa, they require to have a certain permission. And that permission comes from the International Air Services Licensing Chairperson, meaning that the FOPs are responsibility of the chairperson of the International Air Services Licensing Council. So they arrived in South Africa with the crew without any permission. They landed in Cape Town and they were detained. The aircraft was detained as well as the crew. They were detained based on the fact that they illegally entered our airspace, and they also landed in the airport, our airport, without having permission to do so. It is a breach on our security, hence they are now being detained.
This is 5 crew members that have been detained together with the aircraft. Have they explained why they landed in Cape Town?
They were saying they came to take the crew of the Angolan airline, which has not been operating. They were coming to pick them up and taking them to Angola. But there is a procedure that needs to be followed. You don't just barge into our airspace without permission. And what has happened here is that they came in, and when they landed, there was a serious breach on our security, and unfortunately, our law agencies has to take responsibility and now deal with them decisively. What we understand is that they were hoping that they are going to ride on the permission that is being given to the TAG, which is the Angolan airline, which has permission to operate in South Africa. But that company that came in here do not have permission, and therefore there has to be consequences for the operator as well as those that breached our security.
Speaking of that security that is being breached, does this give any kind of indication in us having flaws with regards to the security? And should the lay South African be worried when such incidences take place?
Usually in other countries around the world, when an aircraft entered into our airspace illegally, the Air Force, meaning that our military in South Africa, which is South African Air Force, has to be alerted, or they have to be themselves, because they do have a radar to guard our skies. They need to be on alert for those that are transgressing our airspace. And if that airplane does not have a permission to fly into our airspace, they need to deploy a Gripen or one of the fighter jets to drive them out of our airspace. Or if they are continuing to want to get into our airspace, then they need to ground them to the nearest airport, and then they must be detained because they illegally entered into our airspace. Usually what happens is that when such incidents happen, it means Air Force was not on the ground or was not alerted. They would have immediately entered and fly them out of our airspace. But it looks like Air Force was definitely not in place here. That's why then the CAA and other authorities, when they land, they had to now implement the rule of transgression when you do such a thing of getting into an airspace without having a prior permission.
Lastly, we do know that the aircraft together with the crew have been detained. What's the next step from here?
What we know is that the Angolan embassy in South Africa have tried to negotiate with the council, and the council, unfortunately, or Department of Transport, unfortunately, the law has been broken. and the law agencies and the prosecution has to happen in this case. And I doubt if it's going to be very easy for them to willy-nilly ask South African government to release them. Because all of us, when we get into, particularly pilots, when you get your training, you do what we call an air law. That air law, it stipulates the rules of the game very clear. Now, if you are not permitted to get into a foreign airspace with unregistered aircraft that is not registered in the country that you are going to enter into, you need a special permission and a special permit to do that. And therefore, it cannot just be a diplomatic issue where we just, the Angolan authority comes to South Africa and say, you know, our people made a little bit of a mistake, therefore release them to go. It can't happen like that. They cannot be allowed to refuel that aircraft, number one. Number two, that aircraft cannot leave our airport, which is in Cape Town, without being prosecuted. And if they do that, then our laws are just as simple as that. There has to be something that needs to happen as far as that is concerned.
Surely something has to give. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us that insight and update. That is Phutego Mojapele, who's an aviation expert, speaking to us about the uncleared jet from Angola that landed in Cape Town.